Introduction to Human Resources Management, Chapter 4, Analyzing Work and Designing Jobs. Workflow design is a reference to the process of analyzing tasks necessary for the production of a product or service, and the task assigned to specific jobs and positions. The workflow is basically everything that needs to happen that has been designed by HR and management to ensure that employees are aware of all the qualifications and requirements that are necessary to achieve the tasks that are been assigned to them. Workflow analysis is the systematic approach to look at things like job outputs, which is the product of any work unit, the work processes of the activities the work unit's members engage to produce the given output, and the inputs of the raw materials, the time, the materials, the equipment, the human resources that are needed to carry out the work process. So if you're looking at a workflow analysis, what you're doing is you're assessing how your current status, or if it's a new company, it could be a brand new process, but most companies that are doing an analysis are looking at a system that has been put up already, the workflow, to make sure that you're getting what you need as an output and that you have all of the sufficient inputs to make it work. Figure 4.1 talks about a development of a workflow analysis. So the first step is to analyze the output. You almost start at the opposite end, like what are we trying to achieve? What is the end goal that we have in mind? What product information or service is provided? How do we measure the quality and the quantity of that particular item? The next step is to analyze the activity. What is necessary to get to that point? And then you break it down even further, kind of going in reverse, and you look at the raw materials. What materials, data, information do we need to be able to start this whole process? What equipment do we need? Special capabilities, software, physical equipment, etc., that are needed. And then we look at what types of people are needed to be able to put all of that together, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they are requiring to be able to perform those tasks. So you start with the end goal in mind, and then you work back and you break it down to every level of specificity that is necessary so that you can check off all the boxes and make sure that everything that is needed is provided. Workflow is very closely associated with an organization structure. And if you've ever worked for a place that had an organizational chart, you'll know what the organizational structure looks like, because the chart is basically just an example or a snapshot of how the organization is put together. Typically at the top, you'll have the CEO or the president or the owner. You may have some subdivisions by department, and then that will break down into offices until you get down to the individual employees. It can also show how each department and each work function is related. So there's a few different ways that you can organize the structure. Ideally, the whole point of it is to put people into the positions where they are most efficiently utilized. And it's to bring them together so that they can collaborate and really produce the outcome that the workflow plan has put together. You can have different varieties of organizational structures. You can have a centralized structure, meaning that everything kind of goes through a home office or a source of truth that you would have to go and ask to get decisions made. You could have a decentralized structure where the opposite of that centralized structure, you have maybe various satellite offices or decision-making authorities that are made at the location or locally so that you don't have the backlog of things that need to happen. I'm not saying that centralized is worse and decentralized is better or vice versa. It really depends on the format and structure of your company and what your organizational strategy and mission is. Some companies work better with a centralized process. Some have much better workflow outcomes with decentralized processes. You really just have to measure what your strategy and your mission is and which might be the best way to get to that end result that you're desiring. You can also go by functional groups, what people do by their job title. So you could have the CEO at the top, and then you could have the legal department, you could have the HR department, the marketing department, the accounting department, R&D. Everybody in each one of those boxes is going to be doing very similar work, and that's typically how a lot of places are done. You could also break it up into a division according to, for example, if you're a manufacturer, product. If you're a large tech company, you could have a laptop division, you could have a cell phone division. If you do other manufacturing stuff, like Samsung makes washing machines and they make computers and phones and TVs, you could break up your organizational structure into the product that you're doing as opposed to a more generic functional layout, because each one of those groups is going to have their own functional layouts, and it might make more sense to group them together by product. You could also have geographic organizational structure. You could have North America, South America, or Europe. Centralized and decentralized structures could work even if you have a functional, divisional, or geographic or product group as the basis for your organizational structure. A job analysis is really taking a look at the information about the jobs that we are considering having It gives essential knowledge for staffing, training, and performance appraisal, and other HR activities that are done. So if you really look at each particular role, if you go through that workflow analysis, you'll be able to identify the types of people. If you go to that bottom square, who do we need to do it? And then we can map it out by task. Who's going to be doing which task? Who's going to have which capability? Who needs to talk to other people? That all goes to both the workflow and the organizational structure. So ideally, when all of this is being designed, it's not being done in a vacuum. You're not doing your work analysis or your job analysis without a workflow analysis. You're not looking at the workflow analysis without the organizational structure. They all need to fit together to get the optimum level of efficiency. So the job analysis will produce job analysis itself, the job description, and the job specifications. A job description is basically just a list of tasks, duties, and responsibilities that each job would entail. The key components of it are the title of the job, what you're going to call it, a brief description of the types of tasks, duties, and responsibilities that are included, and then you give a list of the essential duties with detailed specifications about what that is. If you've ever worked with somebody and they tell you, oh, that's not in my job description, this is exactly what we're talking about. An example of a job description is included over here. This is a little bit dated because it's from an older book, but I thought it was pretty useful. If you want to work for Union Pacific, it gives you an idea of what the job is like. It gives you an overview. The job description is it's an entry-level position. You'll start as a switch person or a break person. The duties, you're going to be outdoors. You have to work 12 feet off the ground. You won't work a standard 40-hour work week. This is basically just a high-level preview or overview of what the job is. If I don't want to work 12 feet above the ground and I don't want to have a non-40-hour-a-week standard work week, I already know that I don't need to apply for this job. And then that can help the company because they're not going to be wasting time looking at people that aren't really a good fit. It's really so the company knows what they're doing, but it's also to communicate to people outside so that the proper people are interested in the job and you can attract and recruit the appropriate people for the job. The job specification is a little bit more detailed, so you get the job description, which gives you kind of an overview. The specification is much more detailed, so you're getting down to knowledge, skills, and abilities for each particular job. What do you need to know? What facts, what procedural information do you have to have in order to complete each task? What skill do you have to have? The skill is a level of proficiency of doing a particular task, and the ability is kind of a general capability that you possess, that you are able to do something. Other characteristics is just kind of a catch-all, job-related licensing. I'm an attorney. If I was going to get a job as a lawyer, I have to be a member of the Massachusetts Bar. If I'm in private practice, I have to have malpractice insurance, etc. So whatever types of certifications, personality traits that the company feels is important or required, that can all be included in the job specification as well. So going back to the next version of this, the train crew service job at Union Pacific, we've done the job overview, the job description. Now here's the requirements and the specifications. You have to be 18 years old. Okay, if you're under 17 or 16, you can't apply. You must speak and read English because that's the way it works. That can be argued that it is a bona fide requirement of the job, so you wouldn't be necessarily having a disparate impact on people who don't speak English. If all of the rules and the safety measures are in English, that is a requirement of the job. You have to be able to use a computer keyboard, and you have to be able to count and compare numbers, so you have to have some basic math skills. These, again, would be bona fide requirements of the job. You have to be able to solve problems quickly. You have to be physically strong. You have to be able to push, pull, lift, and carry up to 25 pounds frequently, 50 pounds occasionally, 83 pounds infrequently. If these, again, are bona fide requirements of the job, the fact that you can't do it because of some disability does not open up this employer for a discrimination case. Because if it is a bona fide requirement of the job, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, that would not be a problem for them. Because if you have to do that, that's what the job is. You have to be able to do that in order to be eligible to get hired. Now, in order to create the details of the job specifications to get a job posting so that you can hire people, you have to get sources of information. Where are you going to get all of that from? Well, if I was writing that thing for the Pacific Railroad, I would probably talk to people who do the job. So you can talk to incumbents, people who actually do the job, and they hold that position in the organization. You can talk to observers, such as supervisors, that can tell you a little bit more about what needs to be done. You can hire external job analysts. You can also go to available information banks online, like the Directory of Occupational Titles. That's put up by the U.S. Department of Labor, and the Occupational Information Network, or ONET, which is an online job description database that is provided by the Labor Department. So if you go to the next slide, there's an example of what ONET looks like online. I think that's a fairly recent screen capture. It may look a little bit different if you go there. What it does is if you were trying to develop a job and you're trying to make sure that you're up to industry standards, or if you're making a new job that you hadn't hired for before and you don't know where to start, you can put in a search term in here, find the job, and they will give you all of the types of requirements because they accumulate this from throughout various industries. It's a good way to get a head start on what's going on, and it is provided for free of charge from the federal government. When you're doing a job analysis, you can also do a position analysis questionnaire. It's basically a survey of 195 questions about work behaviors, conditions that people will answer. The key sections are information input, mental processes, work output, relationships with other persons, job context, and whatever other characteristics might be important. And you can look at the results of that to help you draft all of the information that you need for your job descriptions and specs. The Fleischman Job Analysis System, that's just another tool that you can use to try and do some job analysis. It's available for you. They look at categories of abilities, including written comprehension, deductive reasoning, manual dexterity, stamina, and originality. Some of these jobs may not require it. This is kind of a one-size-fits-all. You can decide which questions are the most relevant and exclude those that are not. Another part of the job analysis is maybe looking at teamwork where it may be important. If you have a team, it's important to get people with different skills on the team. Sometimes you may only have people that can do one thing. But even if you had a sports team, if you have a hockey team, the goalie is not going to have the same job as the defenseman, and the defenseman is not going to have the same job as the center. The fire department that we had an image of a couple of slides earlier, even though they're all firefighters, that doesn't mean that they all do the same thing. Some go inside, do the rescue with the axe, and they use the ladders. Some just drive the truck. Some handle the hoses. They are all very specific skill sets. They may have some crossover training so that they can backfill for people, but they usually become specialists. So you have to have some degree of specialization on the team so that the team can work cohesively together and have complementary skills. Authority differentiation refers to the allocation of decision-making authority. So is it a group? Do you do a vote? Is there one person on the team? Do you have a manager that oversees the team that makes decisions for them? That should be established as well. There's also the temporal stability, which is time. How long are the team members going to work together? Is it a short-term project? Is it a long-term project? That should all be specified as well when you're putting team together. So that plays out with job analysis as well. The reason the job analysis is important is it's basically the building block of everything that you do. If you're going to try to do some re-engineering and work redesign, you need to have job analyses in place. If you're going to open a company, you need to know what kind of jobs have to get done. Human resource planning is involved in this as well. So if you're trying to figure out how many jobs we need, are these the right kind of jobs? If we're not able to do the work, we need to hire more people. Maybe we need to reorder the types of jobs because they're not being done efficiently. So maybe we need to hire people. Maybe we need to keep the same people but reorganize the way that they do it. You need to have a job analysis and the process in place to be able to review all of that to make decisions about how to move forward. It also relates to selection of new employees, training of new hires, performance appraisal for existing employees, and career planning and career paths for people who are already on board. The competency model of job design is included in here. It basically allows you to identify the different types of capabilities that are required to help build successful positions. A competency is just an area of capability that an individual will understand that enables them to do the work more successfully. I'm a lawyer. I had to go to law school. I know how to write a complaint. I know how to write regulations. I know how to interpret regulations. These are competencies that you would expect a lawyer would be able to possess. The competency model will identify all of the types of competencies that contribute to the success factors for one job, and then you can create a competency model for different groups, different levels of the organization, or even the entire organization. But the idea is that you can drill down to each particular job so that you understand what the competencies are for that job group, that department, and the organization as a whole. I'm not going to go through the next slide, but it does give you the project manager competencies for an example, and then the proficiency ratings for how you go about doing this to determine whether or not they are competent. So I'll just do the first one, the organizational and planning skills. If you're going to be a project manager, we want to have people that can establish priorities on projects and schedule activities. If you are below expectations, you can't do the basic tasks. If you meet the expectations, you understand the basic principles, and if you exceed, you are able to do everything and can coach and teach and lead others. So when you're judging whether or not somebody's good at the job or will be good at the job, you can look at the competencies and then you can rate how well they fit. And then the person with the highest ratings obviously gets the biggest raise, or they end up getting the job over other candidates. Job design relates to defining how work is going to be performed and what tasks will be required for a given job. Once that's established, as I said, in order to maintain a competitive advantage, you may need to go back and do job reskilling or job redesigns. Job redesign happens on a regular basis because in order to maintain that competitive advantage, to sustain that competitive advantage, you have to check in from time to time and determine whether or not these jobs that you may have designed a couple of years ago or 10 or 20 years ago are still relevant and lead to the successful achievement of the mission and objectives of the organization. So you want to look at the processes that you've got and decide whether or not those need to be changed. If the jobs are done effectively, you may not need to do anything, but you may find things that could be improved upon. So you have to understand the nature of the job through a thorough analysis, and then you have to understand how it works in terms of the workflow. Workflow can be a problematic thing because one position may need to complete their job before the next position could even start to do their work. So you have to understand how everything is interconnected and where the contingencies are within the work plan. So once you figure out all of that, you kind of have to do this holistic overall view of it. You can change one job, but you have to be aware that if you change that job, you may interrupt the workflow for other jobs. So you'd have to have more of a comprehensive view. You may only want to tweak a couple of things, but you have to be aware the law of unintended consequences. If you change one job, it could change multiple other jobs as well. So that's just something as a caveat to be aware of. The next slide I'm not really going to go through, but it does illustrate everything that goes into the job. You want to design for mental capability or capacity, design for efficiency, design for motivation, and design for safety and health, which is ergonomics. We're going to go through each of these in individual slides later. You want to design efficient jobs because if the job makeup is designed efficiently, that means you're going to be using the least amount of resources to get the task completed. Industrial engineering is people who study jobs to figure out the simplest way that a structure can work and to maximize efficiency. It's basically like an economic review of how the jobs play out. So the idea is to reduce the complexity of work. The more complicated a job is, the more likely people are to make mistakes or potentially get injured. If you reduce the complexity of work, it also makes it easier to train people to do that particular job. This is usually done for highly specialized and repetitive jobs. Think manufacturing on an assembly line. You may only be responsible for 4 or 5 steps in the creation of an entire product, but if you focus on only those steps, you'll get really good at it. You'll be able to get trained on it very quickly and become efficient in a very short period of time. One thing about having repetitive jobs is it can tend to be demotivating. So you might want to do some things to make the jobs more interesting. Motivation is directly correlated to satisfaction. Satisfaction is directly correlated to retention. And as we said, if you can retain good employees, it can reduce your costs over time. So why do you want to design jobs that motivate? Make sure people have a positive attitude. Workers with positive attitudes are typically motivated. Characteristics model includes characteristics that boost motivation. That includes skill variety, task identity, task significance, and autonomy, along with feedback. Now, skill variety, we just talked about making the jobs less complex. If you have a very simple job, you do 3 things, and you do that 8 hours a day, 2,000 hours a year for 30 years, you might get pretty bored over time. So there are ways that we'll talk about that you can provide differences to make the job more interesting. You want to make sure that people understand what the task is, that you relate to the task, why it's important, the task significance, how it fits into everything. If you don't do your job, other people will not be able to do theirs. That kind of goes without saying, but it's worthwhile mentioning it so that people really understand the importance of their job. To the extent possible, you want to give people autonomy. That goes to empowerment that we talked about in earlier chapters, and obviously feedback through performance review and let people know if they're doing the job correctly. If they are doing it correctly, that still deserves feedback. You don't want to just be quiet when they're doing it right and criticize them when they're doing it wrong. You want to provide constructive feedback if there's things that need to be corrected as well. The next slide just kind of shows what's going on with the skill variety, task identity, etc. Less motivating jobs tend to have few skills. You only have a small part of the whole thing that you're working on. The work you do doesn't really have much of an impact on others. Decisions are not made by you, they're made by other people, and it's hard to see what's going on. The more motivated side of the scale here, you have a lot of skills, you understand maybe you're doing the whole piece of work, or at least you understand why it's important. You have an impact on others, you have freedom to make decisions, and the effectiveness of what you do is readily apparent. So if you want to have more motivation, not all jobs are able to be on the right side of the scale. So to the extent possible, try to design jobs that are both less complex but also have a sufficient level of interest or to be interesting so that people can be motivated. If you have a job that is repetitive or maybe has less skills involved, you could do things like job enlargement, which is to give people a few tasks, This is also something that's useful to do for people that you may be considering for promotion. Give them a couple of things, give them authority to make decisions on certain aspects that aren't in the regular job. See how well they do at it. If they do a good job, then maybe put them in training, maybe earmark them for somebody that might get promoted. That can keep their interest in the job as well. Job enlarging is when you combine several relatively simple jobs to make a new job that have a wider range of tasks. So you could learn one simple job and then you get moved over and learn another job. Once you master both of them, you can do both of them together. Job rotation is when you take somebody that has been trained to do a particular job and you put them on something else for a period of time. If you're in an assembly line and all you do is put the radiators on a motor of a car, you do that 8 hours a day, that can get boring pretty quickly. So we'll train you on how to install the doors on the car or the wheels on the car. Let's say you do it for 3 months, you do the radiator. Now we shift you over and you do something else. The people who are doing the doors now learn how to do the radiator. It can do a couple of things here that are beneficial. Number one, it can keep the job interesting because if you don't like the radiator part of the job, you may like the door part better. And if you're doing a rotation, you know that even if you have a job that you don't love, eventually you're going to be doing something else that might be a little bit better. It also is beneficial to the employer because I now have multiple people who are skilled and trained at doing different tasks. So if somebody calls in sick one day and I've got somebody that had gone through a job rotation before and had been trained to do some other task, I could then bounce them over and fulfill one of the jobs that may be more critical at the moment. So it can both give a benefit to the employer because they're able to utilize the flexibility of having a cross-trained workforce. It's also beneficial to the employee because it can keep the job more interesting. Job enrichment is giving more empowerment to jobs by letting them have more decision-making authority. Again, this is based on the nature of the job. If you're at a low-level job, I'm probably not going to have someone working the cash register at a supermarket decide, whether we should merge with another firm or something. We're not talking about that. But within the context of each job, determine whether or not there's something that can be allocated to them to give them a little bit more decision-making authority, a little bit more autonomy. If you have a work team and you use self-managing work teams, these can also be motivating because it allows for the team members to figure out how to develop what's going on. You can give them the autonomy and the skill variety and the task identity, and they can figure out how to do it themselves. And provided they come up with a solution that works, because they had the input on it when it was being developed, it can give them more motivation and more satisfaction with the job. Flexible work schedules can be appealing for employees. It's also appealing potentially for the employer. Flex time is when you allow people to choose starting and end times that are different. I had an office that was open from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. I had some staff come in at 6 in the morning and they left at 2 in the afternoon. I had some people that came in at 10 in the morning and they left at 6 in the afternoon. The people who came in at 6, maybe they wanted to pick up their kids at school. The people who came in at 10, maybe they wanted to drop the kids off at school. Maybe they had other aspects. They had to take care of their parents, whatever it may be. By giving them that flexibility, they are still able to work there, and they are able to get the time in each day. The thing about the flex time is there's usually a period of core hours. So when we did 6 to 6, you may have had a 6 to 12 or a 6 to 2 time schedule. You may have been on 10 to 6, but both of those employees would have been in the office between 10 and 2. Those are considered core hours. So if the early morning employee and the later morning employee need to meet on something, they will both be in the office because their hours overlap. Job sharing allows 2 part-time employees to do basically a full-time job. This is also useful if you have to consider whether you need to do downsizing. If you don't want to lay off people, you may be able to have people accept part-time work. So if we have to get rid of 2 jobs, we may be able to get 4 people to work part-time and share the 2 jobs. When the economy picks up, there's a benefit because they can go back to full-time. There's also a benefit to the employer because instead of laying people off and then when the economy picks up, we have to hire new people if we're going to take advantage of this upturn in the economy and make as much money as possible. I've already got people on the payroll that know how to do the job. So it's just changing their schedule at that point rather than finding brand new people to train them up. Compressed work weeks is when you allow people to work your regular 40-hour shift in less than 5 days. Instead of doing 8 hours a day for 5 days, you can do 10 hours a day for 4 days. So you can work Monday through Thursday and have a 3-day weekend. Remote work is allowing people to work remotely outside of the office rather than being in person. A lot of places after the pandemic have done that. During the pandemic, I was 100% remote, so we did everything on Zoom or WebEx or whatever various type of software that we had. After the pandemic, we went back to a more normal work schedule. Currently, I work 3 days in the office and I have 2 days remote. Some places have gone 5 days in the office. Some places have stayed 100% remote. But again, if you have that ability to do that, that does free up schedules, and it can be a benefit to your employees, something that they value, where they would want to choose to work for you as opposed to one of your competitors. The next slide just gives some alternatives to the 9-to-5 job. We talked about flex time. It gives you that core time example. Compressed work week, again, it gives you the graphic illustration of what that looks like, and job sharing in the middle. Ergonomics is a study of physiology, the physical requirements of doing a job. A lot of physical jobs require the use of equipment. Equipment can be designed so that you don't get a lot of injuries or repetitive stress. If you think about the workplace, though, if you're in an office, most people are going to be working on a computer. And if you take a look at your computer right now, you'll notice that the order of the keys maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. You've got the QWERTY row on the top. The reason that the letters are designed that way is because when they invented the typewriter, there was a physical requirement that you had to push a key that would bring up a piece of metal with a letter attached to it, and it would hit a ribbon with ink on it. And if you had words that were used very frequently and the letters were next to each other, if you typed very fast, those little hammers that would come up would get stuck. And they basically spread out the letters that are used the most so that you wouldn't have a mechanical problem with the typewriter. That's not an issue with the keyboard, but we use the same typewriter keyboard that we had from before because that's what most people were used to. If you do take a look around, you can find keyboards that are designed more ergonomically sound. Most people, if you put your hands on the home row, your elbows have to be next to the side of your body and your wrists are kind of splayed so that you have to line everything up straight. Your body, more naturally, your fingers would be facing each other. And you can buy keyboards that are split down the middle with half the keyboard on one side and half the keyboard on the other that allows your hands to be placed in a more natural position. So that's an ergonomic design. If you type a lot all day long on a standard traditional keyboard, you could get tendonitis, you could get carpal tunnel syndrome, you could have issues that could prevent you from working to your fullest capability. So that's just an example of ergonomics. The chair that you're sitting in, hopefully it has lumbar support so you don't get back pain while you're sitting. If you're doing things where you have to stand up a lot, you may have boots that are designed with lifts or molds in your shoes to give you better support. If you're using equipment, it's designed so that you can hold on to it better without slipping and dropping it. So the study of all of these things to be able to prevent physical strain on the worker, that really can help management make sure that they can get the most out of their workers. Because if you design a workplace where people are going to be getting injured and then can't work, that's going to hurt your efficiency. So if you can redesign work to make it more worker-friendly and more ergonomically designed, you can have greater efficiency because people are more available to work and they have less time taking time off because they're sick or they're hurt or they're on workers' comp. You also want to look at mental capabilities and limitations when you're engaging in job design. The mind does have capabilities. You can do a lot of things, probably more than you think you can, but it also has limitations. Technology can cause information overload. It can also be very distracting because the nature of cell phones and the algorithms that they use on social media, the bell goes off, your brain is stimulated, you get the reward hormones in your brain. It can be very distracting and it can lead you to having a hard time concentrating. So technology, if you have too much of it, it can become very difficult to focus on what you're trying to accomplish. So the goal is to figure out how to simplify the mental demands of jobs to limit mistakes. Again, going to job design, you want to have it less complex. If you can limit the amount of information and memorization that's required for the job. If it's a physical location, you make sure that the desk is appropriate. You have lumbar support on the chair. There's good lighting. You give easy instructions, easy to read gauges and displays on the equipment. All of that can actually just help make people be more comfortable on their job and therefore more effective and efficient. That's the end of Chapter 4. There's a few summary slides here that you can review. And we'll move on to the next chapter.